Well, we have economic distress in these times, but back into the 30s there was serious economic distress, and my father lost his home. So he decided to locate a place where he could raise his family, and he found an old house in the American Addition for $700, and he bought that house. As you know, the American Addition was the original settlement for the African Americans in this area, in Central Ohio, as a matter of fact. So many African Americans have their roots in the American Addition, at least through relatives. Maybe they moved out, but through relatives they had their roots there.
Yeah.
So it had a certain certain mystique about it, even when I was a young kid, because we knew we were the original settlement. It was kind of a good feeling to have that the African Americans had located a place where they felt comfortable, and they settled there, and they mostly owned their property, and they were very proud of their property. Yeah, my father was from Sicily. He had no baggage.
Yeah.
In terms of race relationships. So
yeah,
we were raised without any sense of race. Living in that neighborhood taught me that there's no difference in people. Certainly that's important. And the people did have their problems, whether you were white or black or whatever. You had your problems, you had to deal with them. And we dealt with them together. The American Zinc Oxide Company was located up the street on Windsor Avenue, west of Joyce, and it produced sulfuric acid, among other things. And they threw the acid onto the street and into a ditch that ran along our property and along the American Addition. My family tried to start a nursery there, a landscape nursery, and one year the sulfuric acid was so bad it burned all the leaves off of the plants. The American Addition for years was not part of the city of Columbus when I was a little kid. It was kind of in the county. They tried to have a voluntary fire department, but that was useless because there was virtually no water that they could use unless they could carry it on their trucks. And the houses that were built were very poorly built. We had numerous files. One of the the strongest recollections I have of the American Edition when I was young was the numerous house fires. People didn't have a lot of electricity. They used kerosene lamps. Furnaces weren't always available. The wood-burning stoves. And some people were lucky and had a coal-burning furnace. But fires were frequently a result of that type of style of living, and the houses would burn up, and the people in them often were killed as a result of the fire, unfortunately. I know of at least two people, one across the addition that I knew, Mr. Osborne, John Osborne, who was just a wonderful person. He was a cook in Virginia. He moved to the addition. He'd come to our house. He would prepare food, and just a wonderful person. And he died in the fire. And then up the street was Mr. Mitchell, who had his house caught on fire, and he died in the fire that I knew. But there was a lot more that occurred. But as far as services, we had virtually no services. I don't ever remember a garbage truck ever coming down our road. If we had garbage, we'd have to figure out how to dispose of it ourselves. Yeah. Yeah. And another thing is, that city, that part of the city, the American Addition, became a dumping ground for everybody else in the city. So we had a couple lots up the street from us. On our road, where we lived, we had to put a gate up to prevent people from going back into the areas and dropping large amounts of trash off. So we put a gate up to block those intruders who thought that this was a dump area. So the area just got neglected. And the more it got neglected, the more it got neglected. After the city looked at it and says, gee, it looks like it's an overwhelming project. I know that mayors have come in. Sensenbrenner came down there and looked at it. Moody came down. I remember Moody held a couple meetings down there to look at the area, and it was just overwhelming. It was overwhelming to the city. To what can we do with this area, and how can we do it? It was so overwhelming that they felt that ignoring it was probably the best policy, and ignore it they did. The city did ignore that area, and for years they ignored it. But the residents didn't create such a hassle about it. I mean, they didn't march on City Hall. They learned to live with it. We lived with that circumstance. We knew that the city was not going to do much in the area. They weren't going to take any suggestions. There was a few groups that were formed to meet with the city. I never became part of any of those groups because I knew the city was not interested, and we needed to survive there best we could. And another thing, most of the young people would move out. So it became a neighborhood of older people who owned land. So if you get the picture here, here's a picture of older people who owned land, who felt it was very important to them because it's something they owned. They didn't own land before, and they owned a piece of land, and they were not willing to give it up so easily. Maybe the city could have relocated everybody, and maybe it should have. I'm not sure. But if they had done some minor things to make life a little more desirable, I think that there would have been a stronger movement to revitalize the area among the residents. And I hate to be sentimental, and I've been too sentimental this whole thing, but you're taking me back 40 years, so it's something I haven't thought about for a long time. Life was difficult, and I haven't thought about that for a long time. Well, actually, when when my father died, I decided it was time to move on. Because that was his home, which he loved. Well, I would say that there was an extraordinary location in Columbus that was special to a lot of people. And even today it's special to a lot of people. Because many people, even though they don't live there and never would admit that they lived there, had relatives and family that lived there. And they have memories of that community. And they're not all bad memories, and most of them are good memories.